To prepare for Matrix Resurrections, which I am ridiculously excited for, I rewatched the Matrix trilogy for quite possibly the 100th time, and gave the Animatrix collection another viewing for the first time since it was released 18 years ago. I also gave Enter the Matrix and Path of Neo another shot. I didn't love either game at release for different reasons, but I've changed my mind on the sequel movies in the last few years, especially Reloaded, so I figured I owed the games a shot at redemption. That is absolutely the reason for this video. It's not just me hoping to cash in on sweet YouTube algorithm juice in the run-up to the movie. Honest. Well, my replay did indeed make me appreciate one of the games more than I did at release. The other one though is so much worse than I remembered. Let's start with Enter the Matrix, which was a movie tie-in game like no other. Enter the Matrix was developed alongside Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions, but instead of having you play scenes from those movies, you experience a separate story that takes place off-screen during the movies. The game even fills in gaps from the movies, such as the replacement of the Oracle with a new actor. This is hand-waved away in Revolutions, but in the game we learn that the previous Oracle was killed by the Merovingian. The opening to the game is picking up a package from a post office, which follows on from the Osiris story in the Animatrix. Jada Pinkett Smith and Anthony Wong filmed scenes for the movie and the game at the same time and with the same technology, sets and choreography. There are also cutscenes using the in-game engine, but most of the story is told through FMV, which looks exactly like the movie. The Wachowskis even directed the action scenes, and best of all, there's more Monica Bellucci. Lest we forget, there's a video game in here too, developed by Shiny Entertainment, who I was a big fan of at the time thanks to the Earthworm Jim games and Murder Death Kill, MDK, which I've always considered to be a bit of a hidden gem, although I strongly suspect that should I ever go back and play it again I'll realise why it's hidden. Anyway, Shiny got the contract by showing off its tech that could make character models look like the actors, and it was impressive for its time, especially for consoles. Enter the Matrix released in 2003, just after Matrix Reloaded hit cinemas, and like Reloaded it received mediocre reviews, although it sold over 5 million copies, which isn't all that bad. I agree with the critical consensus that Enter the Matrix was mediocre, or maybe mediocre to good, but many of the reviews were quite hyperbolic with their criticism. The word rushed was used a lot, and while there are signs of it not being finished, I've played games in a less finished state, especially movie tie-ins, which are often developed late because of all the secrecy around the plot. I think it's important to note that just because it was rushed doesn't mean it was half-assed or a cheap cash-in, not given the effort that went into connecting it with the movies and with assistance from the directors. That said, I was disappointed with Enter the Matrix on release. Obviously, like everyone really, I wanted to play as Neo. I might have settled for Morpheus and Trinity, but Niobe and Ghost weren't even in the first movie and are clearly secondary characters in the sequels. Of course, one of the reasons they're secondary characters is because they're off doing their own thing, which we then play in the game. I do appreciate having a game where both playable characters are people of colour, something that is still shockingly rare. Enter the Matrix is also quite short, and while the two playable characters technically have different campaigns, they don't play that differently, and sure do visit a lot of the same locations. Ghost is better with guns and Niobe favours hand-to-hand combat, but the differences aren't huge. My major disappointment was based on simply unrealistic expectations. Matrix Reloaded ended on a major cliffhanger, and I was obsessed with trying to piece together clues to work out where the story would go in Revolutions. If YouTube had been around back then, I'd have been clicking on all those videos with big red arrows in the thumbnails. I'd hoped Enter the Matrix would expand on Neo's powers outside the Matrix or provide clues to the bigger story. Obviously, it was never going to do that. I was stupid to think it would. But the fact is, when I played Enter the Matrix, I found the story to be hugely anticlimactic because I'd hoped for more. Looking back on Enter the Matrix now, I am amazed at how ambitious the project was and how much faith the Wachowskis placed in the medium, which had a terrible reputation for licensed games. I'd love to see movie producers work this closely with game developers more often to create something that adds to the franchise instead of just letting us play out something we've already seen or have it be relegated to non-canon content. Kind of like what Disney is doing with Star Wars, but perhaps a little more adventurous with the stories being told. As much as I admire Enter the Matrix's ambition, I have to admit the story doesn't quite come together, and ultimately it feels like you're experiencing a side story to the main event, which of course you are. But you don't want it to feel like you are. There's not much in the way of an arc or character development. It's all one long side quest, and it's not even a side quest to your own story. After picking up the dead drop message and generally running from agents a lot, you do some missions for the Keymaker until the power plant mission that Niobe and Ghost do near the end of Reloaded. That last part is quite exciting, but the rest, not so much. Neither Ghost nor Niobe flesh out their personalities beyond what we saw in the movies, which frankly portrayed them as more machine than human. There's nothing in the way of humour. Now I know the movies themselves aren't exactly laugh fests, but they get away with it because their story is compelling enough to carry your interest. That's not the case here, and some actual jokes would have gone a long way. The only thing I found funny wasn't really deliberate. It was Seraph apologising to people in advance for kicking their ass, except he always ends up getting his own ass kicked. This happens in Path of Neo too. This guy has a lot of confidence for someone who is 0 for 8 in fights at this point. The expensively produced FMV moments look great and could easily be from the movie, but you soon realise that little of interest happens in any of them. Sure, the sets and the actors are all from the movies, but there isn't much going on. The experience reminded me of watching deleted scenes from DVD extras. Competent enough work, but not something you'd miss. The game tries to make an entire story from content that would quite rightly be cut from a movie. The FMV scenes don't fit into the game's levels as well as I'd like either. I'm guessing Shiny Entertainment had its hands tied a bit here. There was probably an insane amount of secrecy, and I wouldn't be surprised if Shiny had to work to a rough outline or a set of storyboards until the last minute. Things just don't flow as they should. There's this memorable scene with Persephone who says she's going to accompany us through a secret doorway only for the action to start with us on our own. Transitions going the other way feel rough too. In one early boss encounter, you're told you need to kick an agent off a plane and then jump off yourself. However, if you do that, you die, even though you have a parachute on. You have to wait around after kicking the agent off the plane because it's the cutscene that shows you jumping off the plane. Some of the non-FMV cutscenes, by the way, are so empty they look broken. It's a jarring contrast to the expensively produced FMV moments. All in all, I think it's fair to say the story is a missed opportunity to expand on what was happening in the movies. It fills in a gap that not many people wanted filling in or even noticed was there. Gameplay is a mix of shooter and melee combat with a focus button that slows down time and lets you perform some of the flashy moves we all fell in love with in the movies. Your abilities and movesets fit the characters well, which is good, but also kind of part of the problem because it does remind you you're not playing as Neo. As cool as Niobe's moves are, Neo's are simply cooler. Still, the slow time effect is fun and powerful and recharges quickly. The whole focus thing obviously bears more than a passing resemblance to Max Payne. It feels weird to say that because you could also say Max Payne got its slow time effect from the Matrix movie, which released a couple of years before. For what it's worth, Max Payne development started before the Matrix was released, and the developers claim slow time in Max Payne was inspired by Hong Kong action movies and John Woo. I can't help but wonder whether Enter the Matrix would look different if it weren't for Max Payne leading the way and doing some of the hard work around bullet time in gaming. Shooting in Enter the Matrix is bad when not using focus. You can't aim manually and nearly every shot misses. However, with focus you can hardly miss. That's on keyboard and mouse at least. Controller requires more input. There's auto aim though, and even automatic switching to new targets once an enemy is dead. The lack of player involvement means there's a bit of a make your own fun kind of vibe, so you do all these fancy jumps, sideways somersaults and wall running to keep things interesting, before using a bit of hand-to-hand combat to finish off stragglers. For that hand-to-hand combat you have a punch and kick which you can combine with the directional inputs for combos, many of which aren't listed anywhere and don't necessarily do more damage, they just look different and add variety. The close-up view looks cool, although you are locked in here, which leads to awkward transitions after fighting and makes it harder to break out and do the stuff like wall running. While a bit limited, combat is satisfying because it works smoothly most of the time. You feel in control of the characters and they respond how you expect. The movesets suit the control such that you don't really need to be told how to do anything, you'll just figure it all out yourself. If this sounds spectacularly obvious, then just wait until we get to Path of Neo. The movement looks a little strange at first, but you soon get used to it. Niobe and Ghost are always sprinting, which feels great when running from an agent, for example, but a little off in smaller and slower paced sections. There's no stopping to explore or admire the scenery. I think this is deliberate. The game wants you to always be moving on to the next fight. You're not supposed to relax, you're supposed to rush from one goal to the next. It keeps up the momentum. But that leads me to the first major problem. For a game that seemingly always wants to keep the pace up, it sure does have a lot of slow plodding levels. The opening is strong, and then you hit the sewer level. Now sewer levels always suck. It's a fact of gaming alongside red barrels being explosive and knee-high grass making you invisible. There are lengthy sections here with nothing to do except run forwards. The later half of the game is full of long but empty levels like Chinatown and so many repetitive environments I had flashbacks to the first Halo game. The checkpointing can be horrendous. The opening to that sewer level has you run and climb and run and climb and climb some more until you suddenly have to save a guy from a sniper. If you're a bit slow, which I was a couple of times because frankly I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing, you have to do all the running and climbing again. Eventually I realised I could run past most enemies because they don't give chase. For such super operatives, Niobe and Ghost are both shockingly vulnerable to full damage. Oh, and there are some of the worst driving levels I've ever played. You barely do anything, you just follow directions and occasionally hold down a button to have Ghost shoot people. Or do the shooting if you are Ghost. Cars can come flying at you out of nowhere, and if you do die you have to start all the way from the beginning, even though the only part with any risk attached is at the end. The only thing I liked about these sections was the use of signs on the road to direct the way instead of on-screen HUD elements. There are a lot of bugs too, although they may be down to my alternatively acquired PC copy. In neither playthrough was I able to meet up with Morpheus in that infamous car chase scene because the game always crashed. All in all, Enter the Matrix is just about worth playing, but only because it's so short that it ends before it completely wears out its welcome. This was a problem when it was new and full priced, but not so much now. I mean, you don't even really need to finish it, just go in there and mess around with bullet time for a bit until you get bored. There are some extras like a shooting range and a computer console to hack for extras and cheats. Nothing that thrilling, but I do miss this kind of thing in modern games. Shortly after releasing Enter the Matrix, Shiny Entertainment got to work making the game that most of us wanted in the first place. When Path of Neo was announced, it sounded like my dream game. Directed and written by the Wachowskis, Path of Neo would have us play as Neo through the events of the entire trilogy. Nowadays I'd rather play an original story than a straight up recreation of another medium, but back then this was absolutely a dream come true. Early signs were promising. Shiny did extensive motion capture work to make Neo's moves as realistic as possible, and early footage and screenshots showed Neo doing all sorts of insane shit, including flying, which calmed fears I had that the game might have a Superman problem and bottle out of giving you the best powers. The devs clearly wanted to confront Enter the Matrix's biggest problems, namely the limited combat options and short story. However, in looking to improve on what it did before, Shiny Entertainment made its first and probably biggest mistake. Instead of building upon Enter the Matrix, it started from scratch. The rationale being that Neo's powers were too much to fit into the existing systems.
We were hoping we could reuse a lot of the stuff we'd done before, but that was for a mere mortal. This is for Neo, so we had to go back and do a lot of new motion capture.
As you can see, Path of Neo looks drastically different and, in my opinion, much cheaper than its predecessor. And I haven't got started on how it feels to play yet. Obviously the devs know better than me when it comes to making games. If they felt they needed a new system to make it work, then they were probably right. However, the system they chose is not good. Comparing the two games, it's hard to believe they were made by the same team, and that Path of Neo is the newer of the two. While Neo's fighting animations are on point, the rest of the animations, notably in cutscenes, are downright terrible. There are no official voice actors either, just bad sound-alikes, which is a huge step down from a game that not only had the voices, but actual on-camera acting. Path of Neo released to mediocre reviews. I can't find any sales numbers, which I take to mean it didn't sell especially well. Weirdly, Path of Neo seems to be highly regarded these days. I remember watching a couple of YouTube videos a few years ago, can't remember which ones unfortunately, and the sentiment was positive, with most people talking about the incredible moves you could pull off. That was not my experience, as we'll get to shortly. I remember enjoying the games on release, although even back then, when I rarely thought deeply about games or mechanics, I knew something didn't feel quite right. It had everything I wanted, and yet I went long periods of time without playing, and I was never excited about picking it back up. Playing felt a bit like a chore. I thought I liked the game because technically it had all the things I wanted, but deep down I knew I didn't love it, and with hindsight I know why. First though, let's look quickly at the story, because it's more interesting than you might expect for a game that technically follows the events of the movie trilogy, mainly because that's actually not what it does at all. There's a cool opening where you play as Neo in the lobby from the first movie and you have to fight waves of enemies to unlock difficulty levels. This was the Wachowskis' idea. They thought that if you wanted to play on medium or hard difficulty, then you should earn the right to do so. It's a novel concept, although you are thrown in at the deep end with no idea how to play the game, so the results won't necessarily correspond to player ability. I spent most of my time faffing with the controls. Anyway, enjoy the powers while you can, because after this you do the whole office escape sequence, which is dragged out beyond all recognition from the movies. You're supposed to eventually get caught by the agents, although it is possible to escape with Trinity. This sequence introduces stealth mechanics which you won't use again for the rest of the game. There's also a cool moment where you get to do the blue pill red pill choice and can opt to take the blue pill, which throws you back to the title screen. After this you have tutorials which drag on for so long I could have learned Kung Fu for real in the amount of time it took to complete them. You learn how to sneak up on enemies, which you do maybe twice outside the tutorial. Then you learn hand-to-hand combat, sword fighting, pole fighting, guns, and then running and jumping. From this opening you'd be forgiven for thinking that melee weapons would play a big part of the game, but they don't feature prominently at all. I genuinely spent more time learning how to use them than actually using them. Once you're allowed out to play, you spend most of your time recreating the events of the first movie when Neo didn't have many powers. The presentation of the second and third movies is bizarre. You get to recreate some of the famous moments like the big brawl, the Merovingian fight and the final battle in the rain with Agent Smith, but there's an awful lot missing. The devs clearly didn't want to have levels taking place in the real world, which I understand, but you can't tell the story of those sequels without those moments. Someone who hasn't seen the movies would have no idea what's going on. Shiny Entertainment opted to add missions that weren't in the movies, which is fine in principle, but the content adds nothing. There's a bunch of weird dimensional stuff with a Merovingian and a witch for some reason, plus a bunch of smaller missions like saving an artist, librarian, and a load of ship captains. Some can be done in any order, but they must all be completed, and the order makes absolutely no difference, so I don't get why you have a choice. Then there's the ending. This is where shit gets really weird. Cartoon versions of the Wachowskis pop up on screen and tell you that the movie ending, where Neo goes full Jesus, wouldn't work as the conclusion to a game, and so they've done a traditional boss battle instead. I'm absolutely on board with this, although I'm surprised the Wachowskis felt the need to warn players of the change. By this point, the game has detoured so hard from the movies that fighting a massive robot Agent Smith is about par for the course. Perhaps the story's biggest problem is the abysmal presentation. Clips from the movies are used to link from one level to the next, except for some reason those clips are cut up and mixed together seemingly at random. I can't show what I'm talking about because of DMCA crap, but imagine taking a 10-minute section of the movie, finding the lines and scenes you want to show, and then just mixing them all up randomly. Within the game, there's no atmosphere at all. There's little music, limited sound effects, no energy from the voice actors, awkward shots and animations, and just no urgency. Comparing Enter the Matrix to Path of Neo makes the latter look like an early alpha build at best.
You can't run forever, Anderson. He's trapped in the apartment.
Even when recreating famous and spectacular movie moments, you don't feel anything. The pacing is terrible too, not helped by an awful checkpoint system that often has you replaying entire levels, even if there were obvious places to use checkpoints, like after defeating this mini-boss and acquiring a new power. None of it fits together properly. Perhaps the best example, which again I can't show, is that as the game ends after Neo has defeated Megasmith and saved the world, the end credits pop up and "We Are the Champions" plays over the credits. Like real cyberpunk stuff there. It has to be the most jarring end credit music I've ever experienced, beyond even Wolfenstein: The New Colossus. There aren't many character models, so you often get scenes where one character is duplicated over and over, and there are a lot of bugs ranging from missing weapons in cutscenes to Neo mouthing along to words that Morpheus was saying.
Excellent swordplay, Neo. With a focused mind, nothing can stand between you and the path you choose. Let's load up the time trial.
I also went into some weird Paper Mario style world at one point. Where Enter the Matrix was going for a Max Payne vibe, Path of Neo wants to be Devil May Cry. Although the combat system is still melee and gunplay complemented with focus, Path of Neo has much more focus on combos and style. And you do look incredibly stylish. I could put together a highlight reel of my gameplay that would make this look like one of those all-time great games. But I won't, because while it may look good, it does not feel good. People make fun of reviewers when they say things like, "This game makes me feel like Batman," or "feel like Spider-Man," or "like an overweight Italian plumber," or whatever. And sure, it's become a bit cliche, but one of the first things I thought when playing 2018 Spider-Man was, holy crap, this does make you feel like Spider-Man. And it's because of how the swinging mechanics were so sublime. It felt great to play, and that phrase captured my feelings in the moment. Now, the Path of Neo makes you look like Neo, but it doesn't make you feel like Neo. It's a textbook example of the importance of game feel, because no matter how good it may look at times, it does not translate to fun. The biggest problem by far is the lengthy animations that the team worked so hard to get right. Now, some of these animations last longer than Trinity's death scene, and you can't cancel out of them. Once you've committed, you watch Neo punch and kick empty air until that animation is finished. And even when you think it has, it probably hasn't. There's a bit of a delay for Neo to come to a full stop and regain his composure. In games like this, I'm used to chaining together combos on the assumption that my attack will hit, because they usually do. Character action games tend to be light on enemies that block. Path of Neo plays more like a fighting game in that you have to hit confirm before entering the combo, except that first attack takes 5 seconds to play out, and it's hard to tell when you're supposed to start entering the combo if you do hit an enemy because the animation just keeps going. It feels more like you're playing a cutscene with QTEs than an action game with combos. The game even puts button prompts on screen, probably because the devs knew that otherwise players wouldn't know when to continue their combo string. And the combos are badly explained with vague instructions. Does rapidly press mean press quickly after the previous press or press multiple times? To me it sounds like the latter, but I think it's the former. There's nothing intuitive about how you string attacks together either. The most extreme example is a combo called The One, and it goes as follows. Deep breath. Light attack times 5, focus and light attack together, light and heavy together, rapidly tap light, focus and heavy together, rapidly tap light, heavy, rapidly tap light, jump, and then use movement controls to spin. In the heat of battle, there is no way I'm remembering all those buttons. That was an extreme example to be fair, but many combos are similarly awkward, and it feels like the inputs are randomly put together. I should point out that some of my issues are particular to the PC ports and the keyboard and mouse setup. I would have preferred to have played with a controller, however the game automatically binds the controller buttons and doesn't let you change them. And it's a terrible default setup with the triggers used to rotate the camera instead of the right analog stick. That meant I was stuck with keyboard and mouse, which made a few things really tricky. There's a heavy emphasis on linking together enemies to take them all out, and you do this by hitting one enemy with a heavy attack and then pressing in the direction of another and hitting attack again. This is awkward with the WASD keys because you really need analog input, and the terrible camera makes it hard to press in the correct direction anyway. Some combos require a 360-degree spin of the analog stick, which is again harder to do with WASD keys. Although this might be a little particular to me because I do have a nerve issue in my left arm, which makes that kind of movement a little uncomfortable. Shooting is okay, although it's hard to tell when you're actually hitting someone, so you just keep firing until you see some weird ragdoll animation. Neo doesn't move his guns much regardless of where you're aiming, so you just have to hope the bullets go where you want. The transitions between melee and shooting can be fun, such as when you kick an enemy into the air and then start blasting. Basic environmental navigation is annoying, because if Neo has his guns out he won't jump properly or grab ledges. The game assumes that if you have your guns equipped you want to do something flashier, I guess. This isn't so bad on controller, which I think has a button you hold to equip guns, so you just need to let go of that button. On keyboard and mouse it's a separate toggle with a slow animation attached. If you forget you have your guns out, then prepare to watch a long animation in slow time as you perch on ledges and eventually fall to the floor. Generally, the camera struggles when up close or in tight corridors, which is a problem for a game with so many corridors it makes Dead Space look like an open world game. To give the game some credit, there are good ideas here. Code vision is the game's equivalent of detective vision for finding secrets, except unlike most equivalents, it's a perfect fit for the game. I'm impressed there are dedicated animations for things like stealing different weapon types from enemies, and the destructible environments look great and are one of the few things that give your moves any impact. A huge disappointment is that the marquee skills aren't useful and again just don't feel good to use anyway. Take the bullet dodge. You get this skill while on the roof for that famous moment from the movie. It looks kinda bad. You can hang in the final horizontal position seemingly forever. You have to use it a few times to distract agents while Trinity shoots them. I never used it again though because you have to be perfectly still to do it, and just coming to a stop takes long enough that you get hit preparing to do the bullet dodge. Likewise, you need to be stationary to block incoming bullets and throw them back at enemies. This sounds useful in theory, but in practice I could never deal damage with it. Or maybe I was and I just couldn't tell because of the lack of feedback on bullets. It doesn't help that the move is introduced in a fight with agents who of course can't be hit with bullets. The final boss fight lets you straight up fly, but it has all the grace of one of those people who tries to fly by strapping a load of cardboard to their arms and jumping off a pier. This fight looks epic, yet it's absolutely miserable. It's one of the most boring boss fights I can remember. Bizarrely, the fight gets easier as you move through the phases. After knocking off an arm, Smith continues to do the same attacks, but with just one arm, which unsurprisingly is easier to deal with. I suppose you could say that's more realistic, but it means the fight ends with a whimper, which is totally on point for this game, come to think of it. There's a skill tree with lots of moves, although you never have much choice for what you pick. At most you can choose between 2 moves, but usually one is effectively chosen for you. There are also Altman principles, which are mysterious abilities that only last for 1 level. Weirdly, even after unlocking them, they go back to being a mystery, so you have to write down what they do. Path of Neo is terrible at explaining what it wants of the player. I spent ages fighting an agent and generally kicking his ass without anything happening. I thought it had bugged out, but eventually Trinity popped out to trigger a cutscene. In one mission, you need to quickly get to a door after the keymaker opens it, and he will chicken out and close it if agents are close. The game makes it sound like this is your fault and that you need to protect him from agents, but it's actually fixed and you have to fail a couple of times before you can escape. Neo fights Seraph on a bunch of poles and you have to knock him off, which I did about 20 times without it actually ending the fight until for some reason it did. A button on the floor doesn't do anything until a woman tells you how it works, at which point it miraculously functions as intended. This entire dimension area is horrendous, by the way, and I've no idea why you fight a bunch of personified fire ants. The final boss fight I mentioned has a section where if you get knocked to the floor you have to dodge or destroy balls of trash hurled at you. However, it just goes on and on forever in a way that makes you think you're doing something wrong. There's no player feedback and no reason is given why you can't just fly back into the battle. You just have to stand there until an on-screen prompt tells you can move.
Oh God, that was awful. I wish you had shot my kneecaps instead.
It probably sounds like I'm exaggerating or being overly dramatic, but I cannot emphasise enough how little fun I had with Path of Neo. It reminded me a bit of Red Dead Redemption 2 in that it actively doesn't want you to have fun playing it, except at least with that game it did feel deliberate as like part of an effort to be a cowboy simulator, and there's arguably enough polish in other aspects of the game to make up for it somewhat if you're in the mood for a slower experience. Path of Neo is like if Rockstar made Devil May Cry. I want to contextualise my experience a bit because Path of Neo is an old game. Shiny Entertainment was far from the only developer to struggle with the switch to large 3D worlds in the early noughties, especially on console. Even early PS3 and Xbox 360 games struggled a bit. Try playing the first Resistance game on PS3 if you don't believe me. And I'm sure Shiny Entertainment wasn't working on the biggest of budgets here. There are plenty of reasons why Path of Neo is the way it is. If it were released nowadays, you have a bunch of people on Reddit defending it, saying things like, well, you have to remember they had a smaller budget, and I don't think it's fair to compare it to X, and all that crap people say when they get overly defensive of a game they like. Fair or not, Path of Neo came out in the same year, and for the same price, I think, as Devil May Cry 3, which absolutely blows it out of the water for character action combat, which I firmly believe is what Path of Neo was going for, and not a third-person shooter. The mixture of guns and spectacular melee combos has strong DMC vibes, especially when using weapons like swords. But the Devil May Cry games feel so much better to play, mainly because they are infinitely more responsive. The animations aren't realistic, but I don't want them to be. Combat is fast, frantic and fun. Path of Neo is so focused on slowing things down for bullet time that it neglects to consider how good Neo's moveset would look in real time. Perhaps bullet time should have been restricted to gunplay and dodging bullets, and just have Neo do badass melee combat in real time with his hands moving as a blur. While playing Path of Neo, I couldn't help but long for Capcom to remake the game. Right, never going to happen, I know. But a Neo-based power fantasy in the RE engine would be like my dream game. Instead, Path of Neo was a be careful what you wish for monkey paw curls kind of game. Like desperately wanting a new Splinter Cell and getting a mobile game with Sam Fisher in it instead. There is of course a Matrix game that is conspicuous by its absence in this video, and that's Matrix Online. Released in 2005, just before Path of Neo, Matrix Online shut down just 4 years later in 2009 and is now sort of unplayable. I'm sure there are ways of playing some form of the game on private servers, but one, I doubt that represents the true experience, and two, I'm in no way competent enough to figure out how to do that. I struggle with live games, let alone dead ones. The Matrix Online sounds more ambitious than the other two games combined, which is really saying something. The story quote-unquote goes places and is all considered canon, including the death of Morpheus, although I wouldn't be surprised if Matrix Resurrections contradicts that in some way. The Matrix world is a ready-made fit for an MMORPG, so it's a real shame this is no longer playable or that there's no alternative. Maybe one day. Neither Enter the Matrix nor Path of Neo were cash grabs or typical licensed movie games. The involvement of the Wachowskis went way beyond what most movie directors did, and both were designed to be something special. Enter the Matrix had a side story that complemented the movies, and Path of Neo covered the entire trilogy and gave us Neo's full moveset and more, really. The Wachowskis clearly respect the medium way beyond mere lip service. The tech has developed so much in the last 15 years that new Matrix games with the same amount of effort and resources behind them would likely be incredible, and it's a shame that none are on the horizon. Well, that we know about at least. Alright, that's it from me today. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I mainly cover RPGs on this channel, but will often mix it up with videos like this one. If you'd like to support me financially, I have a Patreon where you can get your name in the credits for $1 a month. Okay, till next time. Cheers.